So to start this meeting, I request Dr. Jeevan Kumar to please introduce our chief person, Mr. Ramanathan. Over to you, Dr. Jeevan.
Okay, Dr. Annapurna. Good evening to all of you. It is my pleasant duty to introduce Mr. S. Ramanathan, who will be giving the welcome address as well as the introductory remarks. Sri S. Ramanathan, who was conferred the prestigious Karnataka Rajyotsava Award in November 1998, has had a very distinguished career in the Indian Administrative Service. In all the important posts that he has held, both in the government of Karnataka as well as the government of India, Mr. Ramanathan has rendered outstanding and meritorious services in several sectors of economic development. The important positions held by him in service are Deputy Commissioner of Bijapur, Bellary, Bangalore districts, Secretary to the Government of Karnataka, Department of Development and Cooperation. He was a community development expert with the government of Afghanistan. Then Director Projects, Ministry of Shipping and Transport, Government of India, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Government of India, Vice Chairman, Karnataka State Road Transport Corporation, Additional Secretary, Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Another important position he held was as Chairman of the Airport Authority of India. Subsequently served as Secretary, Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers in the Government of India, and finally Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India, from where Mr. Ramanathan retired from service in 1986. After retirement, he served as Director of the Indian Institute of Public Administration at New Delhi. For the last 30 years, Mr. Ramanathan has been Chairman of the IIPA Karnataka Regional Branch, which organizes seminars, workshops, lectures and other activities on contemporary issues of public administration with particular reference to the policies and programs of the government of Karnataka. Mr. Ramanathan is also the president of the Sadashiv Nagar Residents Welfare Association. He has been occupying this position for more than 2 decades. Mr. Ramanathan has written 2 books, a landmark publication titled Airport Management, and the second one is on Karnataka administration, which is titled Landmarks in Karnataka Administration. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ramanathan is 92 years of age. He will do his 93rd year in a couple of months. He was honored with a citation on the commencement of his 91st year, and I'd seek your permission to read just a couple of lines from the citation. Which was when he was, which was given to him on his commencement of his 91st year. Here is a man with, I'm quoting now, impeccable credentials in the civil service as leader, motivator, pathfinder, and trendsetter, as a builder of institutions, as a model citizen, and above all, as an extraordinary human being with rare qualities of head and heart. That is Mr. Ramanathan, who is chairman of our IIPA Karnataka Regional Branch. And I may also like to end by stating that even today, at the ripe old age of 92, Mr. Ramanathan continues to exhibit the same dynamism and energy he had while serving in the Indian Administrative Service. So that is about our chairman, Mr. S. Ramanathan.
Thank you, Dr. Jeevan. Before Sir starts, once again, request everyone, should the internet or the link go off, you need to click back again. We're facing a lot of technical issues, not our fault. So just wanted to request all of you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeevan. Now over to Ramanathan, sir.
Beg your pardon?
Over to you, sir.
Over to me for the introductory remarks.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jeevan. Thank you for your very flattering remarks about me, which I don't deserve at all. I always make a distinction between a VIP and a VOP. If you don't know what VOP stands for, that's what I am. VOP stands for very ordinary person, and that's what I am. So kindly accept that I am just a VOP, a very ordinary person who has done whatever is possible as civil servant to help the nation and people of this country. I am deeply grateful to Dr. Gurucharan, Director PSC, for accepting gracefully my request to jointly organize with IIP KRB the webinar on the very topically important Public Affairs Index 2020. Before proceeding further, please allow me to recollect with affection and respect for my late regards for the late Dr. Samuel Paul, founder chairman of the Public Affairs Foundation. I knew him very well, and he has been a chief guest in many of our functions that we organized in the 1990s and 2000. In particular, I would refer to the Golden Jubilee Commemoration Lecture of the IIPA in the year 2004, March 2004, where he was a chief guest, and he spoke on the subject of 50 years of governance, trends, outcomes, and shifting paradigms. I would also like to thank my distinguished colleagues in the civil service, Shri Sudhakar Rao, Shri Gurucharan, and Shri Jairaj, and the very eminent panelists who are all here today, Dr. Priyanka, Dr. Narendra Pani, and all of them, and all the other distinguished academics of the Public Affairs Center. My congratulations to the research team headed by Dr. Gurucharan. It's indeed gratifying that all other members of the research team are lady academicians. The team is led by Dr. Gurucharan, but the research team consists of all others who are all lady academicians, and it's a matter of deep satisfaction and our congratulations to them all. It is they who collectively prepared this report, and based on their research on 3 sustainable dimensions of sustainable development, namely equity, growth, and sustainability. I hope the presentations by the panelists and the participants will elicit a good question and answer session. May I also express my desire and hope that IIPA, KRB, and PSC can jointly organize webinars on relevant and contemporary policies and programs of the Government of Karnataka. I will also like to mention that this particular report that we are going to discuss and which will be explained to us in detail is a very remarkable document exercise that has been done. It shows the quality of governance in the states based on the major, particularly the major states, union territories, the smaller states, and northeastern states, and all that. And the parameters and various these things that have been used for the purposes of studying the issue of governance in all these states is something very remarkable, and possibly it's something which needs very wide recognition, possibly even by the Government of India itself. Finally, I would like to thank Dr. Jeevan Kumar, Secretary of our branch, and Dr. Annapurna, Member Executive Director PSC, for successfully completing the procedural formalities for organizing this function. Thank you all once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful, encouraging words and for starting on a very positive note. So now I request Mr. Sudhakar Rao, sir, to kindly provide the inaugural address. He is the chairman of Public Affairs Foundation. Sir, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege to be here today. I don't know whether I can call it, what did you call it? What address did you say? Inaugural address. I would rather term it as a welcome to all the members present as the co-host of today's event along with IIPA Karnataka. And my first and foremost, my thanks and very warm welcome to the grand young man of the civil services in Karnataka, Dr. S. Ramanathan. I think he puts many people, score and more age younger than him, to shame. We have a lovely panel today. Narendra Pani, our own intellectual in Karnataka, Dr. Mathur, and my colleague and the highly respected Jayaraj. So this is basically a welcome to all of you. About the PAI itself, I'm sure Guru Charan will lead or introduce you to the whole idea and explain how his research team, how his editing team worked on the whole project. Basically, of course, as you all know, perhaps it's equity, growth, and sustainability. These are the three essential pillars or the criteria on the basis of which we evaluate the states, the subnational units within the country, and take up a host of other indices, themes, and related parameters to arrive at the index. It's a matter of pride for the Public Affairs Center, of which, by the way, I'm a director, apart from being the chairman of Public Affairs Center Foundation, that the index has found great acceptability among the states, in the media, and its popularity or acceptance continues to grow. We have many states reaching out to PAC to sort of do the same PAI version at the district level, or at a sectoral level, or at a program level. And I'm sure Guru will tell you more about that. And one other point I wanted to make about the index, it's not a once a year static index or indicator or a number. It is actually now, since every year we keep looking at the way the index is being worked out, the necessary changes, the changes in weightage, the changes in the indices to be considered. One of the points that you brought in was that, merely saying that a state is in place A or B or C or 1 or 2 or 3 doesn't help much. And so we have started studying the changes over the year. So what was that particular state the previous year? Has this year seen it improve its position or lose its position? If so, why? Because that is the dynamic side of this whole exercise, because we hope that the states and the governments there can address themselves to these issues as to what is working for them and what is not working. So my compliments to Guru Charan and his team. A lot of hard work has gone into this to keep it objective, to keep it meaningful. While PAC, I suspect, is reasonably well known, Public Affairs Center, Public Affairs Foundation perhaps is not so well known. And I'll use my next 1 or 2 minutes just to tell you a little about Public Affairs Foundation before I hand over the mic once again to Annapurna and thereafter to Guru Charan. Public Affairs Foundation, as Dr. Ramanathan rightly pointed out, was set up by Dr. Samuel Paul in the year 2003. It's a Section 8, then Section 25, currently Section 8 company. And the essential purpose of setting up a PAF when there is a PAC existing was actually to utilize the research outputs of PAC to popularize it, to disseminate it, to make it available to various governments, entities inside the country, outside the country. And Paul found it necessary that a separate organization may be helpful in this regard. Over the years, PAC itself has changed its role a little. I mean, apart from being a purely research organization, it has moved on to areas like actively working on government projects, on bidding for projects relating to governance, relating to governmental projects, and so on and so forth. So the role of the two organizations has become a little blurred, and therefore it was felt necessary last year to redefine what exactly the PAF now should do and what kind of verticals of the in the social sector it should handle. Very briefly now, we have 3 mandates for PAF, Public Affairs Foundation. One is capacity building and training. The second is to develop projects, sort of to give content, to give deep impact projects, capture the essence of a project, and help the various other social entities who are working in the field of social sector or social policy making to see how they can present their products to reach as many people, as many entities, as many recipients as possible. And finally, networking and building partnerships. Dr. Ramanathan mentioned that he looks forward to IIPA and PAC and PAF working together. That indeed is one of our avowed and stated objectives, because we feel that in the social sector, it particularly under the kind of situation that the entire sector finds itself today, there is need for various organizations, various member entities to come together, and rather than replicating each other's efforts or the infrastructure available or the area of study, it may be a good idea to network, to exchange ideas, and to work together. That's actually one of the objectives of PAF, and I'm very glad that Dr. Ramanathan mentioned it. And I look forward to the IIPA, which is ably led by Mr. Ramanathan and Jeevan Kumar, and the PAC and the PAF working together as suggested there in organizing some webinars of interest to the students of public policy or students of governance, and in taking up, in fact, if necessary, joint projects, joint research projects, joint projects on evaluating government policies and so on and so forth. So I will leave it to Guru and his team to see how we can work on this further. We will now go on to the subject of today's webinar itself. Back to you, Anna, for taking this further. Thank you all for being here today. On a personal note, I hope you all had an enjoyable Deepavali, and all our combined prayers, I hope, will bring this wretched pandemic to an early end and normalcy will be restored sooner than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very encouraging address.
Thank you so much, sir, for your welcome address. Now I am introducing Mr. Gurucharan, Director of Public Affairs Center, to give a brief overview of Public Affairs Center and what is PI 2020. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Annapurna. I must begin by thanking Mr. Ramanathan, who called me himself on the day PI was released. PI 2020 was released, and said that, you know, this is, he had already gone through the summary report. I was quite amazed when he told me that this is a remarkable report and you should really have a webinar or something, and why don't we do this together? To which, of course, I jumped readily, because working with IIPA is, I think, very important for the Public Affairs Center. So thank you very much, sir, for this opportunity. We consider it a privilege to be able to participate in this webinar.
Thank you.
PAC doesn't really need introduction. I see on the screen most people who have either worked closely with Dr. Samuel Paul or with the PAC, or are familiar with its work. And most of the senior members of the IIPA Executive Committee, including Mr. S.V. Rangnath, and a lot of civil society leaders like Katyayani Chamraj are also logged in. So everybody knows PAC. I'll only say that there are 3 things that perhaps are less known. One is that 3 years ago, we expanded the mandate of PAC to work on sustainable development, with the Sustainable Development Goals as the framework. And last year, as part of our 25th Silver Jubilee celebrations, we inaugurated the Center for Open Data Research, the data analytics vertical of the Public Affairs Center. We are now perhaps the only civil society organization which actually has a very strong data analytics team, which is developing data science applications for public governance, including the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques in many important human development sectors like health, education, women and child development, and so on. I leave it at that on PAC. And as far as PI is concerned, the lead researcher, the team lead is online, Aparna Shivaraman, and she'll be walking you through the whole PI document or the essence of it. As Mr. Ramanathan pointed out, we're very proud of the fact that it was an all-women's team which generated PI 2020. Of course, they were kind enough to put my name because I'm the director of the organization, not very much more than that. But before I call upon Aparna to make the presentation on PI, I'll just say that it is indeed a very objective data-based composite index. In that, it's the model itself that generates the values as well as the ranking. There is no subjectivity at all whatsoever. Second is that to neutralize the weight of legacy data, which propels many states to top positions regularly, regardless of how they have performed in more recent years. This year, we had introduced a delta analysis, which means that the delta values would indicate how the states have performed more recently. Finally, I think this year the PI 2020 has received very wide recognition. I think it's seen now as a very credible annual assessment of the performance of states in public governance. I'll stop here in the interest of time, and I'll request Annapurna to take it forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I'm going to quickly just introduce Aparna Shivaraman. She's a senior program officer at Public Affairs Center. And as you all know, she is the lead author, apart from other teams, Samriddhi and Mrinalini, the data analyst, who are part of this team. Over to you, Aparna, for your presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll just share my screen because I have a presentation as well. So I hope you're able to see the screen. So thank you so much for being here. And I am assuming that everyone who's here knows what the Public Affairs Index is and what we intended to do. So I'm not going to take too much time to go over that. But in very simple terms, the Public Affairs Index is a data-driven model that aims to rank the various states of India on various parameters of governance. The idea was conceptualized in 2016 for very simple reasons. One, we had not had a comprehensive assessment of governance. States are the theaters of development action, and hence it's important to understand how states are performing, because that's going to tell us how the country is performing as a whole. And third, and the most important probably, was the fact that we have data, we don't use it correctly, and this gives us an opportunity to use publicly available data to sort of compare, assess performance, and provide the states with a mirror to show them where they currently stand and what they can do to propel performance further. In PI 2020, like Sudhakar Rao sir mentioned, every year we've tried to come up with more innovative ways of assessing performance and improving on our methodology year on year. In 2020, for the first time, we made an addition of union territories to our model. This is the first year that we were taking into account the 7 union territories. We have been on a journey of advancing our methodology as and when we learn new techniques and new ideas. So we have used the technique of pairwise correlation in our methodology to make it more significant. I will touch a little more upon this when I come to explain the methodology as a whole. Since this is the 5th year of the index, we also had an independent review chapter done by an independent researcher on the evolution of pi. In terms of analysis, we did an analysis at the Sustainable Development Goals level to understand which of the Sustainable Development Goals were significantly affecting performance of either equity or growth or sustainability, in line with the fact that India and countries across the world are targeting the attainment of the UN 2030 SDG agenda. Like the director mentioned, we do have a chapter on delta analysis, which looks at the performance of states over a predetermined period of time on selected indicators. And lastly, we have a separate chapter to understand the disparities between states, because not all states are obviously performing at the same level. So if the same indicators are being considered, why does this disparity occur? And to see whether over time states are actually moving towards a path of achieving steady growth, because if that is not happening, then there is no point of measuring governance right now. This is the model for pi, and the model was reevaluated in 2019. At the top of the model, we have 3 cornerstones of sustainable development, which is equity, growth, and sustainability, in line with the United Nations SDG agenda as well. And since these 3 pillars are extremely broad and very subjective by themselves, we had a layer in the middle, which we call the themes. We have 5 themes in total, and these have been adapted from the worldwide governance indicators that has been developed by the World Bank. So we have voice and accountability, government effectiveness, rule of quality, rule of law, regulatory quality, and control of corruption. If you are familiar with the world governance indicators, you may know that there is one more theme that they use, which is countering terrorism and violence. Since we are looking at state level governance, we have not included that theme in our model. Below the 5 themes are 13 of the 17 sustainable development goals. Again, when we were developing the model, we did take a conscious decision to include only those SDGs that actually had an impact in terms of state performance. So in SDG 17, for example, which is fostering global partnerships, necessarily does not see the role of individual state governments and hence has not been included in the model. And at the bottom, we have 50 comprehensive governance indicators that try to capture the various facets of governance. This is in terms of the model. Moving on to the methodology, I would very proudly say that in comparison to the several governance indices that we have currently at the national level, the Public Affairs Index has a very superior methodology in terms of its scientificity and the rigorousness with which we have analyzed the indicators. Like I mentioned earlier, we had a set of 49 indicators from Public Affairs Index 2019, and we ran a pairwise correlation because we wanted to consider only those very specific indicators that were statistically significant. So if 2 indicators were measuring pretty much the same thing, then there was no point of just cluttering our model with multiple indicators. The next thing we did was to see whether there were other indicators for which data was available, which we may have not included in our model previously, which could be from a plethora of human development indicators. The next step was the process of data collection. We had to collect data from various central government sources. The data had to be cleaned and put into a format that was then useful for us to do our analysis on. The next step was standardization. And by standardization, what we define standardization is that we try to make sure that all states are comparable. So for example, if you have a state, say Uttar Pradesh, in absolute terms, performance of Uttar Pradesh cannot be compared to the performance of a state like Goa because of the sheer difference in just the geographical size of these 2 states. So we have used either the gross state domestic product or population or a suitable base indicator so that all the indicators and all the states are comparable. At this stage, what we also did was to make sure that states which are the indicators are unidirectional, which means that there are certain indicators like immunization, which are positive indicators. So a better score indicates better performance. Conversely, you have states like murder, so indicators like murders, where high performance is not a sign of good governance. And so at this stage, we also had to make sure that all the indicators were moving in the same direction. Otherwise, it would complicate the comparison of states. The next step was to convert all our indicators into a normal distribution with mean 0 and standard deviation 1. And this is again extremely important to capture the nuances in the indicators. Our penultimate step was the application of a principal component analysis. Now, this is a scientific technique which automatically reduces the dimension of the model and also assigns the scores and the weightages to the states automatically. So in the Public Affairs Index methodology, in no stage do we assign weights to any of the indicators or the themes or the SDGs. It's all system generated and hence helps to avoid bias. And finally, there's the development of the composite index or the Public Affairs Index, and the scores and ranks are assigned. At this stage, I would like to add the caveat that at a pillar level, that is, we, in terms of equity, growth, and sustainability, we have given equal weightage. That's the only place where we have interfered in the assignment of weightages. So we believe that all three pillars are equally important, and hence that portion of the methodology is not system generated. This is on the methodology of the Public Affairs Index. A quick note on the PI data, because this is a question that we have received multiple times on the data. The data for the index is collected only from central government sources. No data is sourced from any independent state government website, just to avoid bias. In the case of missing data, we have made sure that appropriate proxy or substitutions are made. Indicators where data is not available for more than 5 states, we have not considered in the model because it becomes too difficult. For example, the indicator of maternal mortality, we do see that it's an extremely important indicator. However, data is not available for all the states of India. It's only available for 18 states at the central level. And hence we did not want to get into a bias. And lastly, in terms of the Public Affairs Index, states are divided into 2 categories based on population. We have large states, that is states with population greater than 2 crores, and small states which are population less than 2 crores. And then we have 7 union territories. So in total, we have 18 large states, 11 small states, and 7 union territories in the model of the Public Affairs Index. These are the overall rankings for PI 2020. I don't want to take too much time going into it. But in terms of large states, we have Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka at the top 4, and Bihar, Odisha, and Uttar Pradesh at the bottom. In terms of small states, Goa, Meghalaya, and Himachal Pradesh, which have been consistently good performers over the past 5 years, and Uttarakhand, Delhi, and Manipur at the bottom. In terms of the union territories, Chandigarh ranks first, and Dadra, Nagar, and Haveli ranks towards the bottom. We don't have comparisons to the previous years because this is the first time that we have included the union territories into our model. I will quickly move on to the pillar levels. Again, these are the rankings in terms of equity. So we see that Andhra, Kerala, and Chhattisgarh are at the top. Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, and UP are at the bottom. In the case of small states, we have Meghalaya and Himachal Pradesh at the top, and Mizoram and Delhi at the bottom. And in terms of union territories, Chandigarh again ranks first, and Lakshadweep ranks towards the bottom. To go a little deeper into the equity pillar, the pillar had 5 themes and 23 indicators. And very interesting finding is that, and this is something we observed last year as well, is that there are varying degrees of equity amongst the states. So within the states of India as well, there are high degrees of inequality, which is something that needs to be addressed. However, having said that, compared to last year, performance in terms of equity parameters has increased in the states, large and small. We did an analysis to see how much of the overall performance in PI is affected by the equity, growth, and sustainability parameters. What we see is that the overall performance of large states is significantly influenced by their performance in equity, which means that equity indicators are a driver in large states, but this is not a case in the small states, which is a very marked shift from last year, because in PI 2019, equity was a driver for small states as well. In terms of SDGs, we see that even though the SDGs are different for the 3 categories, SDG 16, which has indicators of crimes and corruption, are are the most common drivers of equity performance, which means that states need to focus on crimes, that is crimes against women, children, social minorities, and of indicators of corruption. Moving on to growth, these are the rankings. Interestingly, the top 5 large states are all South Indian states. We have Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh at the top. UP, Bihar, and Odisha are at the bottom, and we see similar performances for the small states and union territories as well. In terms of findings, there are 2 themes and 20 indicators. For all states, growth is a significant driver of overall performance. And the SDG that is most significant is SDG 6, that is access to clean water and sanitation. So again, it is something that states and union territories must keep in mind. These are the rankings for sustainability. We see that Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Chhattisgarh are at the top. Odisha, Jharkhand, and West Bengal are towards the bottom. In terms of performance, a problem we've seen in terms of sustainability is the lack of availability of data on various sustainability parameters, which is why we have only 7 indicators. Now, the parameters of sustainability significantly influence overall performance, and that's the same as last year as well. In terms of sustainable development goals, we have SDG 11, which is sustainable cities, and SDG 15, which is a driving SDG in terms of sustainability performance. Now we move on to the delta analysis, and the delta analysis looked at data from 2015-16. Incidentally, that was the year we launched the Public Affairs Index, to 2019-20. And on your screen are the indicators that we chose for doing the delta analysis, and we generated a similar index at the pillar level to understand performance. The findings from the delta analysis are interesting because in terms of equity, if you look at performance over a period of time, we have states like West Bengal, Odisha, and Bihar, which have been consistently, which have shown good performance, which is not so in the case if you look at only a certain point of time, which means that these states have made catch-up effects over the past 5 years, while Kerala, Punjab, and Maharashtra, which are all consistent good performers, have seen the least progress in terms of equity indicators in the past 5 years. In the case of small states as well, Mizoram, which is a consistent poor performer, has seen the greatest growth, but Goa, which is a consistent top performer, has seen the least growth in the past 5 years. And this is very similar to what we see in the growth and sustainability pillars as well, because we have states like Bihar, Odisha, which are consistent poor performers that have shown the most amount of progress. So it is interesting to see the way how legacy data potentially influences rankings. And also it does tell us that just because a state is a poor performer this year does not mean that they haven't made sustained progress over the past 5 years. But it also indicates the fact that states like Bihar do need to catch up much quicker than the other states. Finally, the last chapter we had was the state of states, and it showed interstate disparities because we do realize that not all states are growing at the same rate. What we see is that in terms of growth, there are 2 gender-related indicators that influence growth, which are the total number of cases of rape and female worker population ratio. Now, both of these indicators have a negative relationship with growth, which means that these indicators are a hindrance, and gender disparity is a real thing if India wants to grow at the pace that we have envisaged. Similar to this, agricultural distress, which is in terms of rural indebtedness and farmer suicides, are also indicators where states are showing consistent poor performance. The final analysis that we did was to see whether states are moving towards a steady state of growth over a period of time. Traditionally, good performing states all states are showing a catch-up effect, but poor performing states are showing a very low catch-up effect. And again, in the case of poor performing states, we see that female labor force participation is not a driving factor, which is a cause of concern. Lastly, we did a cluster analysis similar to last year. We have divided the states were divided into 3 clusters. The cluster 1, which is in green, mostly has the well-performing states. We do see that in this pillar, the states are driven by growth and moderate performance in equity and sustainability. Cluster 2 is what you see in yellow, and it's mostly the northeastern states, which are highly sustainability driven. And cluster 3 is what you see in purple. And that is a cluster that is characterized by poor performance in equity, growth, and sustainability. And the states you see there include Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, Jharkhand, and Bihar. An interesting feature about this cluster is also that a majority of the 100 aspirational districts that have been developed by the NITI Aayog all fall into this cluster. As you can see, those are the black sort of outlines that we have superimposed. So another finding with which I would close this presentation is that what we do see from the delta analysis and the interstate comparison is the performance of states like Uttar Pradesh, which have been consistent poor performers in the index, in the PI 2020 index, but has also seen the least growth in terms of delta ranking. So over the past 5 years as well, the state has not made much progress. So that is another finding that we have from the index. And this was some of the major findings from the Public Affairs Index. Thank you.
Thanks, Aparna. Let me clap for you. And now we move on to the most important, and apart from what will happen, I hand over the floor to Mr. Gurucharan, who's the moderator for this panelist discussion. I just want to lay a caveat. For those who have questions for either Aparna's presentation or for the thing, or for the later panelists, please enter your questions in the chat box so that we can collectively respond to your questions at the end of the seminar. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mr. Gurucharan.
Thank you, everybody. In the interest of time again, I see that we are roughly 10 minutes behind schedule. And I'm sure all of you are waiting to listen to the panelists. 3 distinguished panelists. They don't need an introduction. So what I'm going to do is to very quickly highlight 1 or 2 things that you might not know about them. Jairaj, of course, former Additional Chief Secretary. There's no job in Karnataka that he has not done. He's been a remarkable civil servant and has led from the front. But in the context of the PI 2020, few might know that he was the pioneer of Sakala. Long before the other states spoke about delivery of services on time at one location at a central point, Karnataka had already taken steps, and Jairaj was, I think, one of the key members of the team, along with Mr. S.V. Ranganath and others, who actually pioneered Sakala in Karnataka. Dr. Narendra Pani, again, needs no introduction, but it might be of interest to all of you to know that he has just completed a quite remarkable study, a UNDP supported study on inequality in India. And I also had the privilege of having him as a member of the SDG 8 committee that the government of Karnataka had constituted. And he actually helped develop a macroeconomic model for growth and decent work for our report. So I'm sure he'll have a lot to say on the patterns of inequality across the country. And then Dr. Priyanka Mathur, again, a bright young professor at deemed to be university, Jain University. But what might be less known for all of you, apart from the fact that she teaches political science and has a PhD in political studies, she actually is a specialist in her research interests on displacement, forced migration, and related issues. And I think the pandemic has thrown up the crisis that migrants have faced and what needs to be done, both in terms of rapid response as well as more sustained solutions. Very broadly, just to lay down a rule for the panelists, each of you has 15 minutes, but I'll break it up into 3 segments. We'll go in the first round with 5 minutes each, where you can give some introductory preliminary observations that you might have. Then I'll go around again the second time based on what you've already spoken and if there are any issues that need to be addressed. And finally, there will be a Q&A session. I'm sure there'll be many questions from the audience. So I'll start with Jairaj. Sir, if you could lead the way from the perspective of growth or whatever else you think struck you as far as PI 2020 was concerned.
Thank you very much, Guru. And first, I'd like to thank the Public Affairs Foundation and the IIPA for giving me this opportunity to be present. Am I audible, Guru?
Absolutely, sir. Loud and clear.
Thank you very much.
As
And
always.
thank you. In particular, I owe a debt of gratitude to our esteemed Mr. S. Ramanathan and Jeevan Kumar for this opportunity. I'd also like to greet our esteemed seniors, Mr. Sudhakar Rao, S.V. Rangnath. And in particular, I'd like to commend the leadership and initiative taken by my dear friend Guru Charan in steering PAC through these times. I think it's appropriate on this occasion that we also remember Dr. Samuel Paul, because Sam Paul, apart from being the founder of PAC, was a person who pioneered governance studies in India. And today, if it has acquired a kind of respectability, it is entirely owing to the untiring work done by Dr. Sam Paul. I also want to make a comment about the way PAI has been constructed, the methodological rigor, the data-based verification, and the complete absence of bias in the entire study. As was explained and as we have read in the report, that is truly something that we can be proud of. To those of my colleagues in the government who think that this is another arcane piece of research, academic research which can, be consigned to some corner, I would like to say think otherwise, because this study has great pointers of action. And if you are a discerning person, you can look at this study and discern the essential points in this study and try to bring it into the workplace. I would like to give one such example from my own experience. Way back, 20 years ago, when I was commissioner of BMP for the first time, Sam Paul had released the report card on public services. I think Guru may remember that, and other colleagues in PAC may also remember that. That was, I believe, the first report card released on mapping public services in India, and it was referred to Bangalore city. And there what came home to me with great force was that the people in the city of Bangalore had ranked property tax collection as being the foremost cause for corruption. So following from that study, we undertook a mission of trying to overhaul the property tax system in Bangalore city, and thanks to all the efforts put in by my colleagues and the support of the Honorable Chief Minister, there was a radical overhaul of the property tax system in the form of a self-assessment scheme of property taxes, which has now come to stay in this city and in the state. So there is a lot of powerful example in studies like this, which administrators would do well to reflect on and try to implement in their workplace. I will speak a little about growth, particularly the question that has been posed to me. But I eagerly reviewed where Karnataka stands in all the three pillars that Guru and others have spoken about. We are 8th in the equity list, while Andhra is the first. We are happily 2nd in the growth list of large states. And in the sustainability list, we have slipped from the 1st place last year to the 5th place this year. And overall, if you take the index, we are 4. Well, that is a kind of moderate performance for Karnataka, which is akin to the Hindu rate of growth. That is something like the Karnataka progress story that has, been sustained through the ages. I'm sure that, we can improve on this, and we can certainly reach a better place in each of these pillars in the years to come. Question posed by Dr. Annapurna was, why have the southern states, the 5 southern states, topped the growth table? That's an interesting question. And, I will be venturing into some explanations, part of which are actually value judgments and part of which may be data-based. So I think it may attract a lot of questions. I think there are, as I can make out, 5 or 6 reasons why the southern states have scored a march over the other large states in terms of being ranked high on the growth front. The first, which has also been brought out in the report, is that there has been broad-based government action, I mean state government action, in all spheres that impact on the social fabric of the country, of the state, namely health, education, water, energy, and city development. I will not expound on this because there's a time limit and there are other distinguished panelists who we are all anxious to hear. But state action being pervasive in all these areas is a common feature of all the 5 states in the South. The second, which is very important, is that of human capital formation and skills which have taken place thanks to the good technical and scientific education base, both in the public and private sectors in all these 5 states. Because of the good educational infrastructure that we have, there has been a continuous growth of human capital formation. And this human capital formation has led to a number of substantial spin-offs. Flowing from that is the third reason that I'd like to advance, which is a scientific temper. And by the way, all this is relative to those states that have not done well. A scientific temper and the ethos of entrepreneurship that we see in the southern states. Of course, Karnataka stands out in this respect, but so does Tamil Nadu and so does Andhra. But this entrepreneurship coupled with the scientific temper, to my mind, is an important distinguishing factor when we analyze the issue as to why the southern states are on top compared to the others. The fourth is the level of technology that is employed. And this level of technology, obviously it is evident in Bangalore, which is the science and technology capital of our country. It's also visible in Hyderabad. It is visible in other parts of the South. And I think this technology, especially application of technology, like in Coimbatore and other places, leads to a kind of a propulsion in the growth phenomena of these states. The fifth is the private sector, the existence of a dynamic private sector. If you, for instance, look at the 5 states on the one hand as a cluster and the non-performing big states, the absence of a private sector in these large states, which have not done well on the growth indices, is a factor that stands out. How the private sector came about, what led to its growth are issues that we can discuss and debate separately, but the prevalence of the private sector is an important factor. And the last point I'd like to make relating to why growth in the South is more than other states is that the quality of leadership that we have in the South over the years, to my mind, has been of a higher order. I'm talking of state leadership. I'm talking of the vision that our leaders have. I'm talking of their overwhelming emphasis to deliver good public services to the people, to stimulate growth and so on. To my mind, this is an important factor for the southern states standing out. Of course, in the case of Karnataka, I would also like to say that our administrative legacy, which has been bequeathed to us by our forefathers, is also a factor that stands out in comparison to the others. Now, my dear friends, when we look at the good high-performing states compared to the non-performing states, the outlier here is Maharashtra. Think about it. All the factors I mentioned, the 6 factors I mentioned, characterize the state of Maharashtra, as far as I know. Private sector, technology, human capital formation, leadership, and so on and so forth. Why then has Maharashtra lagged behind? That is something that I would like to pose before the group. There was a second question posed to me.
If I may interrupt you now, Jenny, we'll come back to the second question in the second round. And now, I'll now invite Dr. Narendra Pani to make his initial observations. Keep in mind, it's interesting that Jairaj said that Bangalore is the growth driver. And I think Dr. Pani will have much to say about that. Dr. Pani.
I'm going to skip the Bangalore part because that's an old debate with Jairaj, which takes a lot of time and generates more heat than light. So we'll let that pass for the moment. But I would just like to thank you for this invitation. And also, we have been looking at the PAI consistently for a period of time. The way I see it is a snapshot of the year. And I see it as a part of an academic job to try and understand the story behind those snapshots. And in terms of equity, I think it raises a number of questions, a number of fairly uncomfortable questions. The first one is that just as we, a policymaker, I'm not sure I should say this in front of such eminent administrators, but as someone who's been outside the system and just watching it, you tend to see a trend in pattern. When I was much younger, it was difficult to make a statement about a private sector enterprise when you get into a debate about policy. And today we are in exactly the opposite situation. It's difficult to have a critique of the private sector or of this entire process that has happened since 1991. And that, I think, comes out very strongly in this report, because one of the factors that has emerged in your report is the interstate inequality. Or I would rather see it in terms of interregional inequality, if you like. Even your maps show distinct patterns of the. Now, this is a part of a general process which emerged after 1991. We had a situation across the country of people leaving agriculture, which is a natural part of the development process. But simultaneously, the ability of industry to absorb those workers has been severely regionalized. You had a period where none of the states in the which had bulk of the aspiring districts, the purple in the earlier map, were able to actually generate their own industrial strategy. Even states like Bengal, which were once the leading lights of Indian industry, were not, for whatever reasons, unable to do so. This led, along with that, you had a shift from industry that could tap local labor, like say garment industry, into labor that was more skilled and higher paying labor. So you have a situation which I think Jairaj brought out about the whole process of his emphasis on Bangalore, if I can come back to that. But the whole emphasis on Bangalore, if you take Bangalore in the 70s, grew as led by the garment industry. Post 1991, it has grown with the IT industry, which means its ability to absorb labor or leaving agriculture has diminished quite considerably. Right? So with that kind of pattern, you end up with people having to move across literally thousands of kilometers, as we saw during the migrant crisis, in order to get a job, and then while retaining the family at home. These all male worker groups that come from the states in the north and east of India tend to have a tremendous impact on gender inequality as well. There's no place in those groups for women. So unlike in agriculture, where you have some kind of women's representation, you don't get it in these groups. And the way they function without any connect with home, the distance between the place of work and the place of home, the place of short-term residence and their home, ensures that there is no moral pressure on them to function in particular ways. It's also in a situation where labor rights, the elements of permanence that existed have all disappeared, and that has a moral outcome, because everybody's functioning in terms of what they can get immediately, transactional, if you like. And it's very difficult then to have a set of norms that you put in place, as a result of which there is an increase in crime. Right? We can see it as a governance issue, as an administrative issue, but it's precisely an issue of crime, which I think, once again, your report brings out. Again, that has, in this process, the people in these groups tend to go back to their village with the earnings from the city and try to influence the conditions in their village, which is why you find, as your report is again brought out, that the poorer states have a higher, do better in the Delta Index, because they're essentially getting back the processes that are coming from elsewhere. I could go on, but I think I'll stop here and then we can take it up later.
Well said.
Sir, would you like me to give my comments? Can I go ahead?
Thank you, Dr. Pani. Yes, Dr. Priyanka, over to you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be in this esteemed webinar. And I want to first congratulate Gurcharan sir and his stellar team for their excellent evidence-based assessment of human development and governance across the states in India. Aparna just gave a brilliant presentation as a snapshot of it. And I'm confident that state governments will be able to and must and should draw actionable insights from it, enabling them not just to get their act together, but to pull up their socks to usher in at a faster rate this process of what we call quote unquote development convergence. In fact, I definitely want to convert the humility and the optimism with which it has been presented to a more audacious and a loud congratulatory note. So heartiest congratulations first. Now, I've been given a couple of questions that do you think that the states have compromised in terms of sustainability to focus on equity and growth? How do you envisage the sustainability pillar to be the driving force for development? And how should the states be looking to better their performance in this pillar? Now, as I see that ever since the emergence of the term development and its mapping, we have seen, particularly in a geographically diverse and a large country like India, that there has been a concomitant rise in cumulative inequity, which has adversely affected human capital accumulation in the backward states and especially the disadvantaged populations. And which is why I think so the strength of this report lies in its detailed, cross-state analysis. Now, if you also particularly look at the differentiators, in the states, I was told, let's see, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, and Goa. Now, Orissa ranks amongst the top 3 in the SI, but amongst the bottom 3 in the growth indicator. And as is rightly being pointed out, perhaps the indicator here is for a state like Orissa to focus on why is its growth low. It could focus on reducing dropout rates, increasing utilization of the Nirbhaya Fund, as your report has suggested, increasing access to clean cooking fuel and sanitation. And it is this access to clean cooking fuel, which is one very important indicator for sustainability, clean energy. Tamil Nadu also is amongst the top 3 in sustainability and bottom 3 in growth. Now, it has seen an increase in growth and sustainability, but has seen a decline in equity. And the indicators where the state is amongst the top 3 are usage of renewable energy, fiscal performance, institutional delivery, school outcomes, increased child sex ratio, and reduced infant mortality. Now, of course, these are straight indicators for other states to look up as to how to climb the ladder like Tamil Nadu. Now, Goa. The Goa story is unique. It tops the PAI Sustainability Index. And the equity indicators where the state is in the top 3 are, again, the lessons lie here. In the large proportion of its population that are covered by social protection, it's a top performer in institutional deliveries, immunization, and a good performer in the percentage of households using clean cooking fuel and solid waste management. So when we look into the future ahead and concretely into what suggestions and recommendations we have, we can see that the problem perhaps lies in the imposition of the doctrine of that one size fits all. This actually is contrary to the principle and philosophy of the doctrine of objective pluralism. Now, I quote this line from your report, yet political economy collisions will occur often in a union of states of the kind India represents, sometimes resulting in an uneasy equilibrium, but one that under the circumstances must serve as the basis for cooperative federalism in the quest for a just and equitable society. the problem perhaps lies just there. How do we handle this uneasy equilibrium? And your state of the states measures interstate disparities shows that some of the states are not in a position to actually participate in this competitive federalism because they're rooted in chronic backwardness and endemic poverty, along with being dwarfed by capital and human resource constraints. Perhaps it's time for us to go back and look at those root causes. Now, the societal and the individual trends, of maximizing material progress or wealth, it completely and intrinsically stands in contradiction with any vision of a sustainable developmental path. So what's really important for governments, be it central or state, is to look at their prerequisites of governance, improving the regulatory quality, improving the government effectiveness. Look at not just growth, but focus more on distribution. And also really look at where rise in private incomes are not garnered as resources, as is written in the report yourself, to strengthen public services. What Jairaj sir also pointed out, healthcare, education. Now, I'll end my initial comments with 2 points which I hope to come back to later. While I was in Delhi for 20 years before I moved to Bengaluru. I was fortunate when I was a PhD scholar to work with the very famous later Professor Arjun Sengupta. And he was at that time the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to human development and also to extreme poverty. I think so it's very important for us to bring that paradigm back again into our developmental debate. We need to focus on the right of the human to development. And the second point, which I'll just teasily leave here, is if we need to look at sustainability vis-a-vis growth and inequity, I think so the most important inequity that we need to address is the inequity of gender, and which did come up in Aparna's state of the state analysis. So I'll just leave it here till now.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. I'll now go to the second round. Before doing that, let me just mention that there's a question from Dr. Jose. And the question was, have we taken into account the devolution or decentralization progress made in the states? Short answer, no, those are institutional indicators. We haven't considered that. But thank you for pointing out. Perhaps it will be a good additional indicator that we might consider for PI 2021. Thank you, Dr. Jose, for that. So I'll now turn to Mr. Jairaj once again. But before doing that, to all three panelists, let me just say that, all of you are familiar with Goodhart's law, which says that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And one of the most important elements of Goodhart's law is simply that targets can and will be gamed. And as civil servants aplenty in this discussion, I think all of us are familiar with how targets can be gamed. So it is something that we need to critically think about on how to effectively measure and achieve outcomes. So I'll turn to Mr. Jairaj once again, sir. Again, 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes before we move on to the next panel. Thank you.
I won't take much time this time, but I want to make two sets of points, Guru, which I think are relevant. I grappled with the idea of how do we measure government effectiveness. And honestly, I couldn't come up with a satisfactory score for that. Because in the context of the states that have performed well on the growth factor, for instance, despite all what I have said in terms of the 6 criteria, I hesitate to say that it is government effectiveness, quote unquote, which has led to a higher growth performance. So at some time or the other, I would recommend to PAC that we must do a serious study on government effectiveness, not just by way of a critique, but also by way of suggesting how this effectiveness can be enhanced. Because I heard Sudhakar Rao say that one of the objectives of the Public Affairs Foundation was to promote capacity. I presume it is state capacity. So that is one point I want to submit to the other members of the panel and to Guru and to the others. there was a question that I really thought was very important, and that has also been featured in the report, Guru, which is that even in respect of the high-performing states, there has been a lag behind in terms of agriculture, which is an absolutely valid fact. It is true not only of the so-called high-performance states, but also the other states. And I then did a little bit of researching to see what could be the reasons for it. And I'm sure there Narendra will have a lot to say because he's a very distinguished economist. Institutionally, I think that because of the subdivision and fragmentation of holdings that we see, with the average size of holdings being less than 2 hectares, economies of scale are not possible in our agriculture. And this is really a dampener when it comes to expanding capacity, increasing production, and so on. It may be a cause of distress. The second is, and I was startled to find, Guru, that in Karnataka has the second largest arid area in India after Rajasthan. Second largest arid area. That in Karnataka, by Karnataka, all the southern states, all the states in general, subsistence agriculture is the rule, not the exception. And subsistence agriculture has not undergone a substantial change in all these years at all. And so as a result, this kind of commercial farming, all the amendments that we are seeing today in the agricultural sector are a very recent phenomena, and what impact they will have is something that I cannot assess. Third, technology. The much wanted green revolution was in respect of rice, and that was in intensive irrigation conditions with inputs being provided and so on. Post that, we've not had any kind of technology, of course, subject to correction from my friend Narendra. We've not had any kind of technology for dryland farming, for rain-fed agriculture that can really provide a buoyancy for agricultural production. And this lack of technology is not only in terms of techniques, but also in terms of, the other appurtenances for agriculture, such as storage and so on. And then, to an economist, something that will be very relevant is that the incentives that are in agriculture are very perverse compared to the private sector, compared to industry. So the minimum support price exists, but beyond that, all the gluts that take place, and we see commodities being thrown on the road and so on, all that glut that takes place is a dampener for the kind of decisions that are required to make agriculture buoyant. So although the government has a plan, the central government, that by 2022, agriculture must really come out of its shackles, I think that state governments also have not done much in this area. And I think that the lack of effectiveness of state governments to go beyond the departmental form in terms of rural area is a causatory factor for this. So those are, and finally I come back to something that Sir Arthur Lewis, again, something that Narendra can please comment on. He said in 1942, in terms of the two-gap model, that there is the two sectors, and that, if you want agriculture to grow, there has to be a mass movement of labor from agriculture to industry. And until that happens, this kind of disguised unemployment, low productivity, etc., is something that we are going to see in agriculture. I'm asking Dr. Pani, is that true? Is this duality model still valid in India today? And if so, does it account for why agriculture has not grown and the distress that farmers are facing is so live and palpable? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jairaj. Before I hand over to Dr. Narendra Pani, there's one question from Gopal, basically saying that if you take corruption also as one of the indicators, how is it that southern states seem to rank high on performance despite high levels of corruption, especially on electoral spending? Again, a short answer, one of the problems that we encounter when we try to construct the public affairs index is the absence of adequate, reliable and valid data. And corruption is one of the areas where data is very scarce. It is government data. We do have anecdotal high profile cases of corruption reported, but as an indicator, the only indicator that we have used is the Anti-Corruption Bureau cases registered, how many have been prosecuted and how many convictions have been obtained. Outside of this, there's very little in terms of government data that we can access. But thank you for pointing this out. We will try and see for PI 21 whether we can look at other possible indicators. Dr. Jose, we had replied to your question a little earlier. I hope you were there when we had replied it, but as an institutional indicator, the decentralization and devolution was not used in PI 2020, not so far in the 5 editions, but we'll try and look at it. I think it's an important, thank you for making that recommendation. Dr. Pani, over to you.
Right, thank you. Thank you again. I think Dheeraj raised a very important question, but before I get to that, I would like to first address the issue that you had raised, and that is essentially the question of measurement. It's very easy when you're dealing with a large country to look at difficulties in measurement. You're never going to get sufficient data to cover everything else. But I think if you remember, during the making of the second plan, you had far less data than you have today. And yet you were able to come up with a document that is much richer than, quite honestly, much of what we economists produce today. So, and I think at the heart of that process was to recognize the importance of not allowing the best to become the enemy of the good. With the basis of whatever data you have, it is possible to gain insights. And as long as there is a genuine, honest judgment about the data that you're functioning with, knowing its weaknesses and strengths, you can get a lot more out of the data and the measurement than we get today. In this process, we need to be careful that we are looking at change rather than the accuracy at any point of time, which is what the best looks for. We can look at if there's an error and the error continues at the same level, it will capture change. And that will allow us to look at processes to expand the debate much more. It will allow us to also look at an issue which would bring me back to what Dheeraj was pointing out, that we tend to break it up when you look for perfection at a particular point into sectors. And then we look at agriculture as being separate from everything else, right? And when you do that, we miss out on the fundamental point that, as Arthur Lewis and Dheeraj was reminding us, was essentially that the process of development involves moving out of agriculture into industry, or to non-agriculture, whether it's services or something else. Now that process is a necessary part of development for the simple reason that the land is constrained, and over time, whereas if you have particularly in finance and areas like that, there's no real factorial constraint on growth. So you're able to grow much faster in other sectors. So the movement out of agriculture is a critical part of development. But much of our analysis, much of our data does not look at the issue in those terms. When we look at, we have just studied farmer suicides, and everyone sees it as a part of distress. But the farmer suicide rates are lowest in the north and the east of the country, where, as the PAC maps show, the distress is the greatest. Farmer suicides typically arise when people try to move out of agriculture and fail. They borrow to make those investments, and then they fail. So we need to look at it as a composite process. And when we do that, we will also recognize the magnitude of the task. I think it's for some reason, we have forgotten that across the world, a large country making a transition from agriculture to industry has had tremendous social distress. Going right from the time of the Industrial Revolution, I would include Stalinization and the millions of lives lost there. I would possibly include the moving away from the Wild West and the land intensive agriculture into the kind of modern cities. All have had huge loss of life associated with them, and none of them have tried to do it in an effective democracy. Right? So when India looks at these processes and you look at subsidies in agriculture, it's very simple to say, okay, this is what industry is getting, why are you giving more there? But that's simply because you're overcoming the distress that comes from the transformation. Agriculture is also a safety net. I might have half acre of land and not cultivate it, but I'll still not sell it because I know at some point when I'm really in distress, for whatever, or what I consider a distress, might be a daughter's marriage, could be anything. At those points, I will go back to that quarter acre of land or half acre of land. And I'm not willing to sell it in a hurry. So this calls for a new way of thinking about the transformation. Can we develop a kind of a way of identifying scale while bypassing land? Already you have groups that are putting together large associations for tractor delivery. You can do it in water. You can do it in a number of other areas as well. But I think that is an issue. Jairaj hit the nail on the head when talking about that transformation. It is taking place. All I would add to it is that please also recognize that that transformation is taking place with human beings. And it's a process that has cost a large number of lives before. We can get into other issues later. Thank you.
Dr. Priyanka, it's your turn now.
Yeah, I'll take 3 points. I'll first take your question, Gurcharan sir, and 2 other points and issues that were covered in this discussion till now. The first point about government effectiveness and how do we measure it? That interestingly just brought back a flash of memories. 10 years ago, in Delhi, I was working at the Institute for Human Development. We were empaneled then with the Planning Commission. And we had a CEDA project, which I was overseeing with the late Preet Rastogi. We wanted to evaluate all the evaluation reports of all the government ministries. And we went all over the country, picking up just the evaluation reports of the departments themselves. And then we had to sit together and do an evaluative study of that. We had 3 rooms in our office piled up with these evaluation reports. I remember coming to Karnataka and speaking, to the people at the KEA here also, because they had the best models and they had the best reports ever. And we submitted that final report to the CEDA authorities there. Now, do we really have some indicators and effectiveness to measure that? That is a dilemma which has plagued me since then when I was part of that project. And I think so it continues even now. Who then measures as to how effective the government and the government agencies are saying that they are effective, right? So I just leave it open there, It's for all of us to take a hazard a guess here. Now, the second point that we were speaking about was about data and information. Now, here I will go back to the Niti Aayog report, of last year. And there it's been pointed out that one of the most critical needs to assess progress in implementing national actions to achieve the SDG 14 is to collate the data and information related to agreed targets and indicators. And given the diversity of targets and suggestive indicators, it can be assumed that there will be a need for a significant quantum of data and information that needs to be collected and collated. Now, such a diversity of data and information needs to be collected, collated from a wide range of actors. Let's not forget even civil society organizations, to effectively use the data for measuring the progress. And given the diversity of the needs and the challenges that India faces, it is essential not only to identify additional and new ways of enhanced finances, along with ensuring appropriate and timely deployment of finances. Now, when we're looking at data and information, let's remember there is a financial aspect of it too. That's very much intrinsically linked to it. But at this point, again, a report like the PI index comes in to add to those data indicators. And that's just the path where we need to carry on going. Thirdly, we spoke about capacity. I want to come back on the point on capacity to what I started speaking with about. At the end of the day, it doesn't just boil down to governmental capacity or the state capacity. It also has to come down and connect to how much each of the governmental and the state capacities are enhancing the individual human capacity. The individual human capacity to think that he or she is developing, to think that he or she is growing. You know, the state-led growth and the developmental model needs to reduce itself to come and look at it bottoms up from the human perspective. And here again, I must bring in the equity issue and again highlight the fact that when we are looking at capacity, when we are looking at efficiency, it's very, very important for us to look at enhancing gender equality. At the end of the day, it's an issue that just gets to the end or maybe on the side or as a box to be ticked. I would really recommend to Gurcharan sir and his team that we should have a more centralized approach towards gender equality and, in PI 2021.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. We'll do that. Thank you for reminding us to put gender equality on top of the whole format. Okay, we have one observation more than a question by Mr. Trivikram Pai, who makes an interesting point that, from a local governance perspective, somehow hygiene and public health on the streets of cities is not given adequate attention, resulting in a lot of stray dogs, etc., as in Bangalore, becoming a menace. And that unlike the Commonwealth countries where they have very, let's say, humane ways in which they can deal with these problems, there is need for governments to start looking at it. Thank you, Mr. Trivikram Pai. We are going to be looking at how local governments can play a role in governance, thanks to Dr. Jose's recommendation. So we'll try and take your recommendation also and see how we can factor that in for measurement in PI 21. Okay, one last round now for concluding remarks before we close the session. I realize, Dr. Jeevan Kumar, that perhaps the time was a little short. We could, for the next event, think of expanding it by another half an hour maybe, because I am sure our panelists had much more to say, and they've been remarkable in their both prescience as well as recommendations on the discussion. So I'll go one final round. Mr. Jairat, sir, with you for concluding remarks from you.
Just 2 minutes, Guru, because I don't want you to exceed the time. I'm really enthused that, PAC, PAF have brought about this PAI. And this has really, set me thinking on so many points. I would like to give a few suggestions to you on how you could make this more resilient in the public space. You know it as well as I do, but just from my side. One is, Guru, if with a companion piece with the PAI, if you could have some takeaways for the government. There are tables in respect of each of the pillars that say what are the high points of the pillars. But if there can be specific takeaways, then the possibility of those takeaways being kind of adopted in the governments are much higher, because the attention span in the state governments are remarkably short. It may not have increased since the time we left the government. One. Second, I'm suggesting, Guru, that close on the heels of the PAI and the report that you have done ranking states, a workshop for decision makers, a policy dialogue or something of that kind, 15-20 decision makers from the states, may be a good idea for you to project what PAI, what PAF, your own center, what they are doing and how the state governments can make better use of it. And in that context, to also dilate a little more, as Priyanka also mentioned, and perhaps Narendra didn't because of paucity of time, on state effectiveness. Because I think finally, Guru, the entire report, correct me if I'm wrong, turns on the issue of state effectiveness. An effective state will ensure sustainability, growth, equity, because all other things are more or less equal in the states today. And finally, from what I heard the participants say, some kind of a study relating devolution of funds to the main points of this study. because there is such an elaborate exercise that's being done. You were part of it also on this, finance commissions. Even now, NK Singh has given a report, 15th Commission report. So how do these devolution of funds impact on all these three pillars? Is there a correlation between states having access to higher funds in relation to their performance for growth, for sustainability, and for equity? I think those would be concomitants of the excellent work that you have been doing, and congratulations again from my side for the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That was an excellent set of recommendations. We'll certainly take this forward. Just for the information of the Executive Committee of the IIPA and for other participants, Mr. Jairaj had also made a very important suggestion to us to try and conduct a series of webinars, which he titled as the Development Dialogue. In fact, we are working on that idea, and I'll come back to you, sir, with some more, once we have sort of firmed up an outline, and we'll probably get in touch with Dr. Jeevan Kumar also. So, Dr. Pani, your closing remarks, if any.
I just have two points to make. They're related, actually. One is that the report, the PAI report, brings out and suggests or points to a number of specific developments. It can go with the companion report. I know there are a whole lot of constraints involved, either by PAC itself or by someone else, exploring specific highlights that the report has brought about, the causes for that, the processes that have led to that. Right? And even if it's not possible to do a comprehensive analysis of each of them, even a couple of them would sort of provide greater weight to what has come from the report. In that process, I would just also so if we have a situation where you bring out the PI report followed by a companion report on a specific aspect that you think is a highlight of that, and then go on to see that aspect in terms of an interconnected set of processes, it would be very rich and very rewarding. Thank you.
What was the second point, Dr. Pani? You had
no, this was really, I just wanted to emphasize the processes. That in addition, that when you move into the others, when you take a sectoral view, it helps to look at the details, but we lose important connections, particularly agriculture and non-agriculture.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Priyanka, some closing remarks?
Yeah, I've actually given my suggestion and the recommendation to you, Gurcharan sir, what I wanted to say about centering gender equality. But I'll just close with a final comment on the initial question that I'd been asked to address. I think so the idea of sustainability, in the PI index being linked to renewable energy and forest cover, we need to again go and focus on the SDG goals of 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, right? Because they are the holistic ones which are dealing with the environment. And I think so with the MCC and the last IIPA webinar that we had, we looked at the environment and the development, and we spoke in detail on that. And I think so Jeevan sir has the entire report on that. Sustainability needs to be the base, because if we are not taking care of our environment, if we are not taking care of the planet, growth and equity will all just crumble and fall. So that it has to be the more foundational pillar perhaps than just one of the pillars along with the other two. And at the same point of time, having said that, let's not forget that there needs to be the synergy, the axiomatic synergy between these three pillars. For government, for any developmental perspective, we need definitely growth, but perhaps a different model of growth. We need equity, which looks at all kinds of inequalities, gender inequality also centrally, and we need sustainability. Because at the end of the day, we need to look at, sustainable consumption. We need to look at production where we are like doing more and better with less. And so that we have a better planet that we leave behind for our next generation. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, before I conclude, there are a couple of questions for the panelists. I think it would be nice if they could address them quickly. One is the question from Ms. Katyayani Chamraj, an excellent question. It says, isn't the distress in agriculture because of the lack of cooperatization of farmers owning to small holdings? And she gives the example of the Amul cooperative dairy success. And isn't that the way forward of shifting more small farmers into food processing and so on? Dr. Pani, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah. I see the need for corporatization to overcome problems of scale is, I think, well founded. And I think we need to look at it not just in terms of land constraints, but also trying to put together labor and capital, etc. But we must be realistic to recognize that just that benefit of scale or the economies of scale need not be enough to take care of an increasing agrarian population. In fact, you will have to move out of agriculture, and managing that is rather more important than, rather more difficult, and we need the focus on that rather than just taking it in terms of an agricultural sector per se.
Guru, can I respond quickly to that? Quickly?
Yes, sir. Please do, sir. Please do.
Also, to supplement what Narendra has said, empirically in Karnataka, cooperatives have worked in the area of cash crops like areca, coffee, cocoa, and so on. But it has not worked, Narendra, in terms of subsistence farming. That's a point that we can look at in greater detail as to why it has not happened.
You just need to look at the scale issues. How much can be done?
Correct. So that's just a point I want.
Gurcharan sir, can I take up the question by Dr. Jose?
Yeah, please. I was going to say that. Just say the question. Read out the question. Dr. Jose says, "What about the quality and practice of democracy, and how can one connect and converge development with democracy?" Dr. Mathur.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Dr. Jose. In fact, a couple of years ago, we've had academic studies all over the world on the new idea of deepening democracy. But you know what has always kind of disillusioned me in a country like India, where I'm proud to, call myself a citizen. I had the opportunity to stay back at Oxford and, work abroad, but I always wanted to come back and be in India. We are slowly and largely becoming just an electoral democracy, a democracy that exists for the sake of elections, a democracy that functions only in between, which forgets to function in between elections. So we need to really look at a greater and a wider and a new idea of democracy. Does democracy address these issues of equity, of sustainability, and growth and rights to the person right at the bottom of the ladder? So as a political scientist, I just finished a 2-hour class with my PhD batch before logging in here, where we were looking at an article on the idea of New India. And it was fascinating to hear what the youngsters today have to talk about New India. Can we see a little bit less of majoritarianism and, fascism and just rights and tolerance for one another? So if we are looking at democracy like the textbook idea of democracy, and if we look at development like the textbook idea of development, I don't think so we really have much of a future. We need to think of both these ideas anew today. Sorry if I sounded a bit too idealistic, but I had to.
No. Thank you very much for that. Jose, thank you. You've given us some very good ideas for the next PI, and as have many others. Before I conclude, I just want to make an announcement, which might be of interest to all of you. Next Saturday, 28th of November, we are going to have the annual Dr. Samuel Paul Memorial Lecture. It will be an online event, and we have a very distinguished speaker, Dr. Vikram Patel, from the Global School of Public Health, Harvard Medical School, giving the lecture. We will be sending out invitations to everybody. Of course, I'll request Dr. Jeevan Kumar to circulate it amongst the IIPA members. And he will be speaking on the subject of reimagining mental health in the time of COVID-19. Reimagining mental health in the time of the pandemic. And it should be a very interesting lecture. So I invite all of you to join us, and I'll ask Dr. Annapurna to send you all the details. With that, sir, I close with thanking Mr. Ramanathan for this brilliant suggestion that he made. And this is just the beginning of a series of webinars. Dr. Jeevan Kumar has promised that we will now take this webinar to all other parts of the country. And I hope we'll be able to take you along as fellow travelers when we take it to the North Zone, West Zone, East Zone, and so on. But I want to thank the panelists for an excellent discussion and all the participants for some of the very good questions that were asked. I'll now hand over to Annapurna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gurucharan. Thank you, Gurucharan. We will have a continuing dialogue with you on this and organize number of seminars and conferences on this. Possibly we can have an MOU as we are having some MOU with other institutions also.
Yes, sir. We'll do that.
Sir, I have a request to all of you all. Could you all please put your video and come online? I want to take a group photograph. Everyone, could you just, those who are all there on the screen, could you all please unmute your video icon. Great. I have a colleague, Pooja, who will be taking the photograph. Yeah, almost I think everyone is coming. It's so lovely to see. Just to tell you all, we have had 43 participants engaging in this, and thank you to each one of you all for participating. Yeah, I think, yeah. Pooja, can you move? Yeah. Is Akila coming on a show?
SS Patagundi, also please unmute your video.
Katyani also.
Katyayani also please come on. Unmute
We have,
your
we have a lovely picture of Katyayani, ma'am.
Katyani has a problem. She says the video is not coming on.
Okay, thank you. We're just clicking one. Wait, Mr. Ramanathan is
Mr. Patagundi is coming in.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Coming in.
Patagundi, light munde haki Patagundi nora.
Ramanathan sir, if I could request you to get your screen a little forward because we can't see your face fully.
Or if you could get your face close to the computer, sir.
Yeah, you're fine now.
To the
Sir.
camera.
Fine. Yeah, good. Yes.
Yeah.
This is better. Yeah, this is better.
1, 2, 3.
My face doesn't launch
my
a,
camera in.
Gurucharan, my face doesn't launch 1,000 ships.
But, you were inspired more than 1,000 civil servants. So,
all the way from 4.
And future generations like us, totally.
So,
Okay,
Gurucharan,
get-
on behalf of all the participants here and the panelists, a big thank you, Annapurna, to Mr. Ramanathan for this wonderful event.
Yes, when we all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Really great performance today and very educative, very educative. Should take this forward.
Namaskara, sir.
Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Ramanathan sir, Jeevan sir, Gurucharan sir. Thank you.